Good morning and welcome to our latest episode of Reef in Focus. Big welcome back to those viewers who have joined us before, and of course a warm welcome to those viewers who are joining us for the first time. My name is Jess and I will be your host today. Today's episode is all about coral spawning, but before we begin, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on whose land we are broadcasting from today, as well as the traditional owners along the Great Barrier Reef, whose connections to the marine park environment date back over 60,000 years. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Joining me in the studio today are our regular panel members, Reef Authority Chief Executive Officer, Josh Thomas. G'day, Josh.
G'day, Jess.
And Director of Reef Education and Engagement, Fred Nucifora. G'day, Fred.
G'day, Jess. G'day, everyone.
Now, we do like these webinars to be interactive, so please use the Q&A function within this platform. And today's episode will also be recorded. So if you miss any of the juicy parts, or you would like to share this episode with your friends and family, you could do so after today via our YouTube channel. Joining us today is also special guests. We have Reef Authority Chief Scientist, Dr. David Wachenfeld. We have Tess Concannon, a senior marine biologist at GBR Biology and part of the Reef Cooperative project. And we have Dr. Katie Chartrand, a senior researcher from James Cook University at TropWATER.
Hello.
Now, we're going to do this a little differently today. So I'm actually going to throw over to you, Dr. Dave. Can you tell us why coral spawning is so important for the Great Barrier Reef, and why do we hold our breath with anticipation every time this rolls around each year?
I think there's a lot of reasons we hold our breath and look forward to this time of year, Jess. I think the first thing for people to remember is that although corals are animals, they can't move around. So they can't just go down the street and look for a date in a nightclub or move around and look for a mate when it's time to reproduce. Most corals stuck to the seabed just release egg and sperm into the water and essentially hope for the best. But there is a way that coral can maximize the chance that each egg will be fertilized, and that is to make sure that all the corals of one species release their eggs and sperm at one time, what we call synchronized spawning. And if synchronized spawning was an Olympic sport like synchronized swimming, the corals on the Great Barrier Reef would be gold medal winners. They use a series of environmental cues, particularly water temperature, phase of the moon, and the time of day, to synchronize their spawning so that most of the corals of any given species spawn on a particular night, a few days after the full moon in October, November, or December, depending on where on the reef they are and how warm the water is. Now, when you're underwater and you're looking at the spawning, it's an absolutely amazing sight. It's like being in an underwater upside down snowstorm. So the corals are releasing eggs and sperm, or packets of eggs and sperm. They're often brightly colored, like bright orange or peachy colors and pink. And they're floating towards the surface, which is why it's like an upside down snowstorm. Everything is floating up, not falling down. It's an absolutely amazing thing to see. And if you ever get the chance, I highly recommend going out onto the reef at the right time and going to see it. It is absolutely spectacular. Of course, in order to be able to see it, you need to be with somebody who knows what to look for and where and when. So we really advise people to go out with one of our high standard tourism operators. And even better, if you can go with a master reef guide, they will know where and when to take you to see this phenomenon. So if you imagine that you're out on the reef, you're snorkeling or you're diving, it's nighttime, you've got a torch, you're looking at the corals that are around you, you're looking at one tiny bit of coral spawning. But you've got to stop and think, this same process, this event, is happening on about 3,500 coral reefs that make up the Great Barrier Reef, along 2,300 kilometers of coastline. You are witnessing one small part of a vast ecological event, and it's probably something that corals have been doing for millions of years. Now, one of the reasons we hold our breath is that the coral spawning is the most important part of the process of reef regeneration. In recent years, we have seen growing impacts from climate change, and in 2016 and 2017, we saw the worst marine heat waves ever on the reef, with many of our shallow water corals dying. that since 2017, we have seen the beginning of strong coral recovery in many places. And that is driven to a large degree by the annual spawning. So the annual coral spawning on the Great Barrier Reef, it's a beautiful, amazing event to see. It's a critical process for reef recovery, and it's one of the most vast ecological events on our beautiful planet.
Thanks, Dave. It really is a magical time on the reef. Kind of a little like blind dating, it sounds like. You know, throw yourself out there, see how you go. Obviously, a lot more technical than that, and arguably one of the most important natural events on the reef. And Josh, that brings me to, how does the Reef Authority manage the marine park during important biological events such as coral spawning?
Well, Jess, we've got a marvellous role here at the Marine Park Authority. We've got a diverse program, as you know, and as we've talked about in previous webinars. Look, we manage the reef in a number of different ways. We've got a wonderful zoning plan on the Great Barrier Reef, you know, the rules, if you like, about what you can and can't do out there. They're overlaid with a whole series of plans, sophisticated permitting arrangements, underpinned by fantastic science, traditional knowledge about how people should go about engaging with the marine park to make it a better place into the future, how we should go about conservation activities into the future. Some of what we're talking about here today is around that proactive piece. How do we actively support nature to be its best into the future, withstand impacts from climate? But so too are those classic or more conventional management approaches in the marine space that we undertake around, you know, compliance and relieving pressures on the reef, making sure people are playing by the rules. We don't want people just venturing out into the marine park and on an ad hoc basis doing what they think's best. There really are some great tools, resources out there, and these things are very carefully managed by our expert team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of that information, if you want more, is on our website as well. So obviously tourism during this time plays a big role, Fred. How did tourism, and I know recently we actually announced the 6th cohort of Master Reef Guides, bringing the total to 100 trained Master Reef Guides along the Great Barrier Reef, working with high standard tourism operators. Yeah. How do they go about enriching a visitor's experience during natural events such as coral spawning?
I was just being mesmerised by this backdrop.
It really is.
I don't know if everyone saw. I actually tried to eat one of those spawns just before, but it was just a bit too much for me, a bit too much colour and movement. But look, seriously, the marine tourism industry is our front line, you know. Okay. So they are out on the Great Barrier Reef every day of the year. You know, in all sorts of weather, they're out there, and they're putting their head under the water more than pretty much anyone else. And so they're like our early warning system. So that, and particularly they see things happening on the reef, they're reporting it in via programs such as Eye on the Reef, particularly now during this really important time of the year for the reef with spawning, lots and lots of spawning sightings coming in, these amazing photos that are our backdrops for today's presentation, submitted by Master Reef Guides. You know, there's Markus and Maddie and Johnny are all putting these photos in as part of the sightings that they're seeing out on the Great Barrier Reef. But high standard tourism operators are committed. They've gone above and beyond what's legislatively required of them to operate in the park. So they're committed to sustainable operations. That also includes they're committed to their high value reef sites. So they're actively looking after them and protecting them, monitoring them, and providing that data to us as a management agency. And when you think about the marine tourism industry operating from the ribbon reefs in the far northern part of the park, all the way down to, you know, places like Lady Elliot Island in the south, that gives us a really good spread of information coming into us as a management agency. And as Josh said, helps us make some of those management decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a marine park that stretches 2,300 kilometres, over 344,000 square kilometres, it is absolutely a collaborative effort when it comes to management of the reef. So, Fred, I know today, and we did sort of mention before, we do have Dr. Katie Chartrand joining us from James Cook University, and Tess Concannon from GBR Biology. You know these two ladies well?
Yeah, certainly do. And g'day, Tess and Katie, great to have you here. I'm being a little distracted. There's a hello from Professor Neil at the City University of New York has dialed in, listening to us today, and Parramatta Sen and all of their friends across India as well. So thank you very much for dialing in today and listening to Reef in Focus. Now, Tess, I'm going to first question to you. Now, you work for a high standard tourism operator. You're there on your amazing Remora pontoon out at Moore Reef. Tell us about how your company, Experience Co, is now sort of using, events like spawning, this amazing lab that you're in there on the reef, to really enrich your guest experience.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm out here at our beautiful pontoon, so the Reef Magic pontoon with Experience Co out on Moore Reef on beautiful Concannon Sea Country, and this is I'm sitting in our wet lab, which I think probably the best view from any lab that you could have. So behind us is Moore Reef there. And so, yeah, we designed this pontoon in mind for researchers to come out and to engage with customers and use it as a platform. And we had a spawning trip that Katie and I were working on over the last week and a half. We had absolutely amazing responses from customers and engagement out here. And we're really pushing here at Experience Co as having science and cultural knowledge at the forefront of all of our tourism operations. So we were out here on Moore Reef for about 8 days. We came out just after the full moon for the spawning project, which Katie will talk about a little bit more in detail. But basically, we had our larval pontoons out here that we were collecting coral spawn with, so patiently waiting for them to spawn. And then we reared our little larvae before we took them over to Hastings Reef. But the whole time that we were out here on the pontoon, we were engaging with customers throughout the whole time. So you would have actually seen one of the spawn catches that's been taken down. It would have been sitting right here, right by the snorkel zone. So everyone was able to see what we were doing. We went past some of them in the glass bottom boat and the semi-subs, and then we were set up in the lab all week this week. So we had an open door policy. Katie, Kerry, myself, we were all in the lab. We were testing our larvae for development, for counts, and we had people coming in and out all day, engaging, answering questions, and it's just such an amazing thing to get people involved with. So people are, I think, more and more getting involved with what's going out on the reef. They're realising how important it is for our ecosystem, and so people are really, really engaged in this sort of stuff. But spawning is one of those things, despite it being, like David said, an ancient process, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't know much about. People might know a bit about reefs and things like that. So being able to share that process with people and get them really excited and really involved has absolutely been amazing. People have asked so many in-depth questions and learned stuff that they've just never even thought about. No one really, a lot of time you don't think about how coral reproduces. You think, oh, it's just there. So it's really great to share that story with people, get them to have a look at some of the larvae in their development stage, and just getting people engaged so that they can become passionate about the reef, because that's what we aim to do. That's what we need to do. The more people that are more passionate about the reef, the more help we can get. Citizen science is plays such a big role in our conservation up and down the reef. So the more people get involved, the more we can do. And like I said, we got amazing engagement while we're out on the reef. So many curious questions, not just from customers, but also from crew and staff that haven't had a chance to be out for these sort of events. So it was an absolutely fantastic week.
And sort of enriching the guest experience like that, going back to the reef authorities, see the reef, love the reef. So seeing this type of process firsthand, falling in love with it, and hopefully going home and doing their little bit to help protect it into the future. Now, Katie, you're the other significant part of this cooperative, right? So we've got high standard tourism operations, leading research institutions like James Cook University and traditional owners all working together under this cooperative. Tell us a little bit more about the project that you've been working on.
Thanks, Fred. Yeah, it's been an amazing opportunity to really demonstrate the collaboration that's happening out here all the time on the Great Barrier Reef amongst organizations. But our Reef Cooperative is really driven by that principle of bringing the best of all of that everyone can offer together into one holistic approach for conservation and education and outreach. So yes, from my side, from JCU here in Cairns, driving the coral larval delivery project together with Dr. Carrie Cameron and Reef Recruits, But critically important, the links Tess and GBR Biology there at the pontoon have provided, it couldn't have happened without them. And that outreach and education opportunity that we've had together with Gungandji and Irukandji rangers across the 2 sea countries that we've been working. So that integration, and as well as communication through citizens of the Great Barrier Reef. So it's that real network and engineering that's built this larval delivery project. So what we've been really tuned into with spawning is how we can harness Mother Nature's natural event. We're not modifying it or changing anything that occurs naturally, but we're taking a very small slice, millions of little egg and sperm bundles that were released off a small patch reef near the pontoon here at Moore Reef were collected on the 4th and 5th nights after that full moon, just over a week ago now. And we were able to just keep those safely in our floating nursery system, as you can see in some of those beautiful images that we were able to capture, and basically just maintain and monitor those larvae as they develop and go through sort of 6 key stages of development. And once they were really ready, we were able to concentrate those larvae down and transfer them to a reef where they're really needed. You know, the patchwork nature of the Great Barrier Reef is, as Dave indicated, some areas are incredibly healthy and bouncing back after disturbances naturally. Other areas are struggling, and we have a reef around 40 kilometers away. It's naturally within that footprint of where spawn from this reef where we captured from would be making its way potentially to that reef. But we just wanted to give it a bit of a kickstart by helping those developing larvae get to that reef safely and put them back down onto a patch that just wasn't getting that recruitment of new offspring through this mass annual event. We were monitoring that prior to this year's spawning and seeing signs of concern. So it was an opportunity for us to come together in partnership, assist and put these little larvae back down on the reef, while also then looking at the science and building our understanding, because there's still plenty of things that we don't know. So there's the education and engagement, but there's also an opportunity here to drive towards further outcomes on intervention and restoration that's happening at all scales, from us locally at the small scale together with the larger opportunities that are happening with the large organizations at the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority and Institute of Marine Science. So all of this collective knowledge, as well as traditional owner engagement and connectivity between programs, has been incredibly rewarding. It's not just about the ecology, while that's hugely important, but it's also the value of the cultural importance of these reef systems, the economic value of these high value, high standard tourism sites that we also want to maintain, while also asking some critically important questions along the way.
Thank you so much, Katie.
How did things go over the last week, and what level of spawning success do you think you might get?
I think, it was a great spawning this year. I mean, every year it's a bit of a mix, and we had plenty of slicks. So all of those bundles that floated to the surface. So we were, between the 2 nights of capturing spawn, had millions of larvae by the end of our week of development that we transferred. We had magical conditions out there on the reef, which, is a big piece to the puzzle and being able to work this time of year. We put them down at Hastings Reef on over the weekend, so a couple of days ago, under our settlement sheet. So we have a few different designs as to where we want to place things and be able to measure the outcomes. So most importantly, we also need to learn, what's a success, but also if there are failures, that we can gain new knowledge in future years as we develop this process. So it's never, the answers are never settled from one year to the next. We're always learning something new, and I think that's a great opportunity for us. So for us, the first point of measuring success is settlement. So what we can do is use these little square tiles that we put out on the reef. They mimic their limestone, and they have been conditioned to mimic the reef substrate. We put them down under our settlement sheets as a way to look at the microscopic little larvae that have settled out in those first 24-hour periods, so we can understand if we've had an impact. And the great thing is we've seen tremendously strong signal from where we put our larvae compared to that natural recruitment that we're seeing in the background. So we need to also measure what's also coming into the reef system naturally. So that first stage of success is there, but importantly, we need to monitor over time. So do we have survivorship of these little offspring in a year from now, 2 years from now? There's a lot of pressures on these little larvae that have now settled out as what we call spat, that first coral polyp, as they grow up. So there's lovely little fish that find these things very appetizing. So we need to understand what sort of pressures are there and whether we put enough down to see a measurable outcome in the end. If we put millions out there, just like a tree on land with seeds, you know, you're only expected to get a few that are going to grow into a full-blown adult. So that is a typical, you know, part of Mother Nature's process. Can we harness that to get a bigger outcome where it's really needed? That is the question. So we're learning, and we'll be monitoring how coral cover changes specifically at our sites compared to the natural reef in the background over time. And we look forward to providing those updates in future.
Great, thanks, Katie.
Hey, just to follow on from the monitoring piece, I'm really interested in that. You mentioned you might be adapting or changing your approach with the technology or the equipment you've got. But in terms of the monitoring of the actual coral recovery, over what sort of timeframes will you be doing that? You know, do you expect to see change in a year, 2 years? And how will you gauge that?
Sure, that's a good question, Josh. I think initially, as I said, they're so small, you can't see these little new recruits with the naked eye. So that tracking of successful settlements really important. We'll be going back in 3 to 4 months' time to looking at that real bottleneck. It's those first few months when you tend to see natural die-off of a lot of these little guys that do settle out successfully. And then after that point, we get to 6 to 12 months, we should expect things to stabilize. So those that have survived should reach sort of the, you can see with the naked eye by around 12 months or so. From there on, we'll be able to then look at the coral cover change through photographic images. We'll basically create a map of our footprint where we put our coral larvae down and look at those changes every year. So it's a 12-month cycle to give an opportunity for that coral to grow up and get bigger and compare that with the background reef. And that's really important to have this monitoring in place and start to build in other components, because it's about habitat as well. So we need to be looking at the use of that habitat by fish and how we've been contributing to that broader ecosystem function as well, and the diversity that's at that site.
Fantastic.
So fascinating. Although I am kind of staring at Tess's background, wondering if we can switch.
Yeah, that's right.
David and Katie, I guess we've had a question come through. These types of projects can be seen as interrupting a natural biological process. So can you explain, like, what are the benefits of these type of projects?
I'll just speak up first about, I know that's a concern for people going, what are we intervening with? What are we, changing with Mother Nature? There's been some big failures in the past when we try to give a helping hand and inadvertently hurt the environment. So for us, we're really focused on taking what Mother Nature is already doing. We're not genetically modifying anything. We're just ensuring that the wind and waves and currents aren't letting things that naturally would have drifted off the reef and never have made it down to a reef substrate to settle successfully, has a higher probability and chance to get to adulthood. So the more you put in and down on that reef, the more you're going to get out with the odds and probability. So really, from our perspective, we're focused on just enhancing Mother Nature and what she's already doing for us naturally.
And I think, Katie's completely right. And I can understand why people perhaps get a little nervous when we start to intervene in nature, even though we're doing it to assist and enhance natural processes. But I think what people need to understand is that, the climate is changing. Our planet is 1.1 degree warmer than it was a couple of hundred years ago. We're on a track to be 1.5 degrees warmer in about a decade. And while it's absolutely critically important that we get global emissions under control and do everything we can to constrain climate change, and definitely to constrain it within the bounds of the Paris Agreement, so between 1.5 and well below 2 degrees of warming, that's, beyond that is not a safe place for coral reefs. But the point is, we're already intervening and interfering with coral reefs on a massive scale globally because of the impacts of climate change. What the work of people like Katie and Tess is doing is trying to give back some on the other side of the equation and to help reef recovery processes to give reefs the best chance of keeping up with the impacts of climate change that are still coming. And I think that's the critical balance for all of us, to make sure we do everything we can globally to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time, do everything we can locally to protect our reefs and give them the best fighting chance.
So that's actually a wonderful segue, Dr. Day. We couldn't have planned this any better. But there's a stream of questions coming into us from our international audience. So I'm going to try and mash them all together, right? So, so let's just say, can you tell us a little bit more about the triggers or the cues that kick off spawning, and have they been affected by our changing climate? And for example, you know, with ocean acidification, i.e. the pH or the acidity of the ocean water, if it's getting you know, more acidic, is that affecting spawning, or is coral bleaching that we've had previously affecting the rate of spawning that we're seeing?
Is that a question for me or Dave? I think Dave, you can.
I think either of the doctors could take
All
it.
right,
So
I'll step in with the cues. So I think importantly understanding the cues for spawning. I mean, it's incredibly complex, and there's pieces that we still, as scientists in the research community, don't fully understand. We know that the lunar cycle, the moon phase, is a big part of it. We know majority of corals are going to spawn during that big mass spawning event, which, you know, most people think that is just one night. It's actually over a few nights, so that period of 3 to 6 days or so after the full moon. Different species will go on different nights, and also different times throughout the day, mostly in the evening and in nighttime hours after the sun has set. But we know things like water temperature, and that rate of increasing water temperature in the period leading up to spawning is incredibly important to trigger that final development and ripening of those egg and sperm bundles to be released. But the precise day in which they go each year is still a bit of a guessing game. And we're there watching very closely every night during those days following the full moon to ensure we don't miss it. They can be pesky and temperamental, and you expect them to go one night, and you're sitting there waiting, looking at your watch and hoping it's not going to be midnight when they finally decide to let go of those beautiful bundles. The other important thing with cues, we talk about cues of the spawning, is also the cues for settlement. So we look at the larvae that we were putting down on the reef after that week of development, and we know that actually the middle of the day is an incredibly important time for a lot of these larvae to settle. Some of the work by Dr. Carrie Cameron, one of our partners in this project, has shown that attachment and finding that right spot on the reef is really driven in a large way by the light environment. We know chemical cues from the substrate are incredibly important. The juicy pink substrate, we call it CCA, or Crustaceous coralline algae, is the right sort of bacterial community and chemical cues that those little larvae are looking for when they're finding somewhere to actively sniff out and settle. So all of these little pieces of the puzzle, this ancient spawning, have developed and evolved to be incredibly complex and precise. So we're still learning a lot in that regard.
Really is absolutely quite sounds quite technical, but really by the moonlight, spontaneous, you know, it really is quite romantic and magical. Dave, did you have anything quickly to add on to that one before we wrap this up?
Look, I just think to add to that, the Great Barrier Reef actually only goes at its northern end to 10 degrees south, and it goes all the way to 24 degrees south. So it's actually, a lot of it is not that close to the tropics. And so that water temperature thing is absolutely critical. That's why we get spawning once a year. In other parts of the world, where reefs are closer to the equator and the temperatures are more stable throughout the year, corals can spawn every month. So as the planet continues to warm with climate change, it will be interesting to see whether or not our corals respond to that warming water, and they might change the timing of coral spawning. So far, we haven't seen that. We haven't seen any actual shifts in the timing of spawning or other impacts of climate change. What climate change is doing is it's making marine heat waves more severe and making cyclones more severe. So those are the big impacts on corals that we've seen so far. But it's certainly an interesting idea for the future, whether as the planet continues to warm, will coral spawning on the Great Barrier Reef shift and maybe happen earlier in the year as things warm up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dave, Dr. Katie and Tess for joining us today. It was very insightful. I'm sure we could continue to talk about this for hours. We might have to do a follow-up episode because it is just so fascinating. We really appreciate your time today. You enjoy that water and background, Tess.
Oh, look out the window. Tess is in the good spot. Look at those people. They're in the best spot. They're looking at the reef.
Now I know we're running out of time. So Josh, just quickly, we're heading into summer. It's always a busy time on the reef, busy time for us as reef managers, keeping an extra eye on it. Got any final words for today?
Sure. Look, we'll just, everyone knows we've always got our eye on the Great Barrier Reef, and David's touched on some of the reasons why we are particularly attentive over the summertime. Increased temperatures can lead to challenges for coral reefs. We can see bleaching events. We can see more cyclones. We've got all of our network of partners, whether it's the tourism industry, eyes out there on the water, our own field assets jointly with the Queensland government, or our own expert in-house scientists looking at these things closely. You'll see us reporting on this weekly through the summertime so that we're giving the community and all of our partners the best real-time advice about the health of the reef and how people can engage constructively in this ongoing challenge.
Yeah, and I know, Freddie, you're going to say download that Eye on the Reef app.
Yeah, that's the best way. Get that information into us. Best way to send in sightings.
Absolutely. And it's also got a map of the reef on there as well. So you know what you can and can't do in the marine park if you are out enjoying it, like the snorkelers behind Tess over that summertime. So a big thank you again. This is our last episode for the year, and we thank everyone who has joined us on our webinar journey. We will be back in 2023 with more episodes. After today, we will send out a short survey. If you can fill it out, we do really appreciate your time and use that feedback to look at new topics and refine how we're running the session. For now, I guess we'll just say safe end to the year, enjoy the festive season, and we hope you can all see the reef, love the reef, and protect the reef. Bye for now.
See yous.